Hey, welcome to part 3 and part 4 of the gas station. I just wanted to say I redid them because I did them in a row last time, and I decided, hey, let's do them a bit more expressful, so hopefully you like it. It's going to be in more of my normal voice and less of my lower range, but still not super expressful because I feel like creepypastas are supposed to be for sort of relaxing. Alright, well, I wanted to thank you and just enjoy. I watched as Hannah's eyes moved slowly to my left, like her gaze was following whatever was outside the car. I knew that I should have had other things on my mind, like how to protect us, how to get away, but what I focused on at that moment was how beautiful Hannah's eyes were. The bright blue of her iris was still surprisingly vibrant next to the tired, bloodshot whites of her eyes. I still hadn't seen her blink. Her eyes must have felt like they were on fire. I wanted to scream. I could feel it welling up in my throat, but I held it in. I was still holding on to a fragment of hope that somehow I could turn the situation around and come out, if not a hero, at least not a coward. Hannah's eyes darted quickly over my right shoulder, and she couldn't contain a gasp as the whole car shook violently. I braced myself on the back of the driver's seat as Charlie's body lurched forward and hit the steering wheel. I clutched onto the headrest, waiting for another impact, but nothing happened. I glanced over at Hannah. She was frantically turning her head from left to right, searching for whatever it was that was outside the car. Now it seemed like she couldn't see anything. Was it gone? Was the nightmare over? I whispered to her, too afraid to speak up and risk being heard beyond the confines of the Plymouth. "Is it?" was all I managed to get out before I was cut off by a short, stiff breath, almost a wince, from Hannah. I watched as her eyes looked onto something out the window behind me. "No," Hannah barely managed to whisper. The terror and helplessness I saw in her eyes were too much for me. I'm ashamed to admit it now, but at the time I was so overwhelmed by fear, by confusion, and by physical exhaustion that it was all I wanted to do. I closed my eyes. In the darkness, I heard Hannah scream. I heard something pounding on the pavement outside. It was getting closer. The pounding seemed to be coming from at least 2 different directions at once. I held my breath and gripped the headrest until it dug into my side. I heard a violent scrape against the side of the car, and then I felt myself falling backwards into the window behind me. Hannah's body crashed into mine, and what I think was her forehead collided with my nose. The pain was intense in my nose, which was now gushing blood into my open mouth, and in my body as I rolled violently onto the roof of the car and Hannah landed on top of me. I heard the car hit something, maybe the gas pumps, and then I heard one of the back windows shatter as it met the ground. Rolled newspapers rained down on us from the passenger seat. I felt Hannah throw her arms around me and hold on tight. She buried her head in my chest until the Plymouth stopped moving. I heard the pounding on the pavement fade away as whatever it was moved away from the car. In the quiet aftermath, my eyes clenched tightly shut. I just lay there for a moment listening to the breathing, mine and Hannah. "Are you alright?" I managed to ask after a moment. I opened my eyes and strained to see Hannah. Her face was so close to mine that I had trouble bringing her into focus. Her forehead was streaked with blood. Was that my blood? "Hannah?" Her eyes were barely open. I reached out and shook her. She blinked a few times, confused, and then managed to focus on me. I tried to comfort her, but I don't know how convincing I sounded. "We're alright," was the best I could muster. Hannah didn't say anything, and in silence I heard something that I hadn't noticed before. It sounded like running water, but I knew that wasn't what it was. I bent my neck awkwardly in an attempt to look behind me. As I strained, I could barely see it in my peripheral vision. The pump had been knocked halfway out of the ground and the gas was leaking out from underneath it. It was leaking quickly, so I knew if it hadn't reached the car already, it would soon. I knew the window near our feet had been broken when the Plymouth flipped. I looked back at Hannah. "Hannah, We need to get out of the car, now! I tried to tell her calmly. Finally, my survival instincts were kicking in, and I felt ready to take some action. Hannah looked at me, scared. I need you to scoot backwards out of the window. Hannah let go of me and started squirming out of the car. I don't know how she managed to keep going. I couldn't even imagine all the terrible things she had seen that night. She was stronger than I ever would have guessed. I bent my head forward and watched as she squeezed through the back window and stood up on the pavement outside. I realized that I should have gone out first to make sure that it was safe. I didn't feel quite so brave anymore. I hurried out the window, feet first, before anything could happen to Hannah. When I stood up outside, I saw Hannah nervously scanning the edge of the woods. I followed her gaze. I couldn't see anything, but that didn't mean nothing was out there. Come on, I said quietly and motioned with my hand towards the station. Hannah followed me, eyes constantly glancing back to the darkness surrounding us. When we got into the station, I immediately locked the door. It was small, only 2 aisles really, so it didn't take long to make sure nothing was inside with us. I grabbed some tissue to stop the bleeding in my nose. Hannah slumped back against a rack of candy bars and sat down. She looked exhausted. I walked over to the cooler and got her a bottle of water. Here, I offered, holding the bottle out. She looked up at me and took the water. I think she tried to smile, but it was hard to tell. Thanks, she said, twisting the cap off with her still shaking hands. I looked down at my own hands. I was shaking like a leaf. What were we going to do next? Is there a phone in here? Hannah asked. I probably looked like a complete idiot when she said that. I definitely felt like one. How had that not been the first thing I thought of? Without saying anything, I hurried to the counter and grabbed the phone from the shelf beneath it. When I picked up the phone and pressed it to my ear, I heard a dial tone. I'd never heard a more comforting sound in my life. When I dialed, I heard Hannah stand up behind me. After a brief pause, the phone started ringing. No, Hannah said softly behind me. I turned to her face and saw that she was walking toward the window at the front of the station. She was staring at something, but I couldn't see what it was. The phone stopped ringing. 911, what's your emergency? Before I could say anything, the lights went off inside the station and the phone was dead. I jumped at the sudden shock and then realized what had happened. Hello? Shit! I screamed into the receiver, although I knew no one was on the other end. Hannah was standing at the window now, still staring out. She didn't react at all to the power going out. I put the phone back on the cradle and clenched my fists. My cell was in my house in a bag of rice. I dropped it in the toilet a few days earlier. Before that night, I'd thought it was a pretty funny story. I turned back to Hannah. What's wrong? I asked, walking towards her. That man, was all she said. What? He's alive. I stepped next to her in front of the window and looked out. I saw what she was watching. It was dark. The lights above the pumps had gone out as well. But with the reflection of the moonlight and the gas pooling around the Plymouth, I could see Charlie. He was moving. Oh shit. I hadn't checked his pulse or anything. He'd been alive this whole time. Broken glass had cut him as he struggled to move on the roof of the overturned car. I could see the small lacerations on his body and face. He looked even more confused than he had earlier when he'd gotten into the car. Charlie looked up and he must have seen the keys in the ignition above him. Hannah and I both screamed as we realized what he was doing. No! But Charlie couldn't hear us. He grabbed the keys and turned them. The explosion was so bright I had to turn away. As I shielded my eyes, I heard the window in front of me rattle. Hannah gasped, and I saw that she'd clasped her hand tightly over her mouth, her eyes almost impossibly wide and locked on something outside. I forced myself to look back out the window. I followed Hannah's gaze and immediately wished I hadn't. Through the flames, I could still see Charlie, flailing for those last few seconds in the engulfed Plymouth, trying desperately to escape. Hannah turned away now and sat down below the window, but something inside me couldn't look away. I'd never watched someone die before. I'd seen a dead body once, my grandpa's, but I'd never actually witnessed the final moments of another person's life. I'd never even seen life just fade away like that. If I hadn't left him there, alone in the car, I closed my eyes. After a moment, I opened them. I could still see his body, but I knew that it wasn't really Charlie anymore. I turned away and sat down next to Hannah. Neither of us spoke. There was nothing to say. We just sat there together on the cold linoleum, shoulders barely touching. I was replaying that image of Charlie, helpless in his car, over and over in my head. It was time to admit it. I didn't have a plan. I had no idea what to do, and at that point, I didn't even care anymore. I don't even know how long we sat in there, in our own separate worlds, before Hannah's voice quietly nudged its way into mine. "How long have you been working here?" We'd gone so long without speaking, and I was so deep in my own head that it took me a moment to register what she'd said. I glanced over at her, unsure if I'd even heard her correctly. She was staring down at her feet, stretched out on the ground in front of her. "What?" I asked just to be sure. "How long have you been working here?" The second time I couldn't help it. I let out a short chuckle. Hannah looked up at me and smiled, although I don't think she knew why I was laughing. "Are you making small talk right now?" I asked. Hannah laughed now, and if I hadn't known all the terrible things that had happened that night, I would have thought she sounded happy. It might have just been the exhaustion making us both a little delirious, but it felt good to laugh, and to see her laugh. Hannah shook her head. "I don't know, I guess," Hannah said. She waved her hand at me to dismiss the question. "You don't have to answer, it's fine." "About a month. My dad gave me a job." Hannah nodded. I knew this was a strange time to be having what was by all accounts a pretty typical conversation, but it felt good to just talk. It felt normal. Hannah looked back down at her shoes. I tried to think of something else to say. I didn't want it to end. "It's pretty boring most of the time," I said before I thought it all the way through. "But not tonight." Hannah smiled, but she kept staring down at her feet. It seemed like the reality of the situation had already started weighing in on her. I looked away. Who was I kidding? Laughing and trying to be funny? The truth is, I was terrified, and I knew Hannah was as well. "Is someone going to come?" Hannah asked quietly, not even looking up. "Yes," I said quickly. Even if there's no way I could be sure, I still wanted to give Hannah some sort of hope. "The fire. Someone will see it." That made sense. It was still raging out there. Thick black smoke billowing up over the dense forest. Someone would have to see it eventually. Then I thought of something else. "And my dad picks me up at the end of my shift." Hannah looked up at me and I could see the worry spreading quickly across her face. "What if..." she started to say before looking back down at her feet. She didn't have to finish. I knew what she was thinking. What if my dad drove up and that same thing that happened to us happened to him? What if we just stood there at the window and watched him die? "No," was all I could think to say before another long silence descended on the station. I'd never heard it so quiet in there. With all the power off, there was no hum from the refrigeration, and no golden oldies played at a reasonable volume on the stereo. You never realize how comforting these sounds can be until they're gone. The only sound I heard, aside from breathing, was the steady tick of the battery-powered clock on the wall behind the counter. It wasn't even 3 yet, and my shift didn't end till 6. "Why didn't you leave town? Go to college or something?" I asked, barely even realizing that I was speaking. It was something I'd thought of earlier when I saw her pull up with Brent. Hannah was smart. She was too smart to end up living in that town for the rest of her life. Hannah didn't say anything for a moment. I glanced over at her. She was still staring down at her feet. Because of the situation we were in, it was hard to tell if it was my question that had her upset, but it looked like she was fighting back tears. I hadn't meant anything by it. I had spoken before I even thought about what I was saying. I was about to apologize when she finally answered. "It's complicated." I nodded my head. I was going to drop it at that, but then she continued. "I will move, and I'll go to college, but my mom needs help right now. She needs me here." Before that night, I realized I knew next to nothing about Hannah. All I knew was that I thought she was beautiful, and for a teenage boy, that's usually enough. But I saw a sadness in Hannah then that I was sure no one at school had ever seen. It was something that she carried alone. I turned away. I wanted to comfort her, but honestly, I didn't know how. "Sorry." Hannah didn't even look up from her feet when she responded. "Sorry." "You don't need to be." I looked away. I didn't have anything else to say. Hannah took a short drink from her water, and I realized how thirsty I was. I stood up and I walked to the cooler. I really wanted a soda, but I knew that what I needed at the moment was just water. I grabbed a bottle and turned around. As I faced the window, I glanced out and stopped dead in my tracks. I was looking at Brent. Shirtless and bloodied, sprawled out on the pavement a few feet from the still-burning pumps. And we have the special, because one of my very engaged viewers decided to comment. So, this is for you. Well, now your name is Pumpkin, but yeah. My hometown was an odd place. We had a video store that never had the movies I wanted, a convenience store whose slushy machine was always broken, and a yearly food drive with a weird name. Help Feed Bobby. If you're thinking, who's Bobby? Then you had something in common with my 10-year-old self. Every other kid in town and the people just passing through during the time the food drive was active. We did ask our parents, teachers, and basically any adult why it was called that, but the standard answer was that Bobby was just meant to represent children whose parents couldn't afford food regularly. The other one was that Bobby is just meant to be an acronym. But when pressed on what BOBBY is supposed to spell out, they always found a way to stop or change the conversation. For the longest time, the most information we received was that at the end of the drive, some people would volunteer to take all donated food to its intended destination, and then, around the same time the following year, it would start all over again. One day, my dad came home and told my mom and me that he was going to have to go out next Saturday, as he had volunteered to help deliver the donated food to its recipients. I tried to ask him where the food was going and if I could come with him, but he shot both questions down with, "Sorry, sport, grown-ups only." I wanted to know so badly that I came up with a plan. On the day he was supposed to deliver the food, my dad came home with a truck full of donation boxes. As sneakily as I could, I snuck into the back of the truck, emptied the contents of one of the boxes, and ducked down inside. I realized that the chances of being caught were high, but I didn't care. I wanted to see where all this food went every year. After about an hour, I heard the truck start and felt it move. I wanted to poke my head out and see, but I knew my dad could just check the rearview mirror and spot me. Another 3 possible hours and I felt the truck came to a stop. I heard my dad get out of his truck and some other volunteers getting out of their cars. I couldn't really hear the conversation at the time. I did feel someone grabbing the box I was in. "Damn, what's in this? Watermelons and ham?" He continued to grumble as he carried the box somewhere I couldn't see. It was maybe 45 minutes before he finally placed the box down. I got excited. I would finally see where the food went to. I waited until I didn't hear any more footsteps before I exited the box and started to look around. It was a large cavern. I saw what I presumed was the entrance. The place was lit by what I assume were battery-operated lights. with boxes of donated food stacked everywhere. Looking out on the other side, I saw a cliff edge. Walking to it, I looked over the edge. I didn't know how deep it went, I just knew that it was the size of a football stadium. I kept thinking to myself, what was the point of this food drive? Why bring all the food to some cave? For the 1000th time, who is Bobby? I felt the rumbling before I heard it. Then I saw the cavern begin to shake violently. Looking down, I saw something begin to emerge from the darkness. It looked like the beginning of a bright orange beak. From there, a head only slightly smaller than the hole itself took form. Imagine if a turtle's head were covered in spikes, and you'd have the beginning of what its head looked like. It stopped at about 15 feet from the top of the cliff edge and began to open its large beak. I was paralyzed with fear. I didn't know what this thing was going to do. For all I knew, it was about to breathe fire or grab me with some kind of frog tongue. But it just stayed there, like it was waiting for something. That's when I realized. This was Bobby. This thing came up here. It knows someone will feed it, because it's been fed every year for God knows how long, and this was only the head and the neck of it. I couldn't fathom how big the rest of Bobby could be. My fascination/horror was cut short by the sounds of my dad and the other volunteers coming back down the cave path. I ran back over to the box I was hiding in, but realized they would probably start with that one. So I went to a stack of them near the entrance and crouched down next to it. My plan was, once they all walked past, I was gonna run back up and hide in my dad's truck. The voices and footsteps became audible as my dad and the other volunteers returned. Okay, that should be the last of it. Then we get a break for another year. I wish we could just cover everything in cyanide. Nice wish. There's not enough poison on the planet for that. Then I heard my dad. He sounded nervous. Even if it worked, how do we know that the body wouldn't stick up the whole town? Wait, I see his head. Then I heard my dad's first time seeing Bobby. Jesus Christ. I could hear the terror in my dad's voice. I almost wanted to run out of hiding and go hug him, let him know I saw it too, and he wasn't alone in his fear. But I knew that could make things bad for both of us. Another volunteer disregarded my dad's terror and nonchalantly remarked, "Let's get started. Just grab a box and throw it at that thing's mouth." I watched as they all started grabbing boxes and taking them to the edge. When it looked like all of the boxes were turned, I quietly snuck to the entrance and ran back up to the mouth of the cave. From there, I saw my dad's truck and made my way to the back. A few weeks later, I was in the library trying to see if there was any more information about Bobby. I should have expected my town wouldn't keep records about a giant turtle monster living underneath it, but what was there was still helpful. The monster was most likely named after the town founder Bobby Robertson, and during the time of famine, the town was prone to tremors, and was nearly destroyed during the Great Depression by a sudden magnitude 3 earthquake. My guess is that the townsfolk of the time decided they needed the food more than Bobby, and he voiced his disapproval. I don't think my dad ever figured out that I was there with him, but I also made it a point to spend more time with him. Though I had to pretend I wasn't also scared of turtles now. The next year, he did not volunteer. In fact, he had gotten a promotion at work, and we had to move away because of it. So for the past 22 years, I was able to let help feed Bobby slowly fade into my memories. Until a few days ago, when I was struck by nostalgia for my old hometown. So I started looking into what happened since we moved. My hometown doesn't exist anymore. At some point in 2005, the town collapsed and sunk into the ground. The official explanation was that there were multiple caves under the town, and a long overdue massive cave-in finally happened. It was harder to find any more information on what the town was like before the cave-in, but the most relevant piece I found came from a Facebook group for it. I learned that the new people had replaced the previous town council in 2004, and in the same year, they voted to end Help Feed Bobby food drive.